Welcome to the Postgame podcast. Welcome to Shooting It Straight with Justin Jackson. We are live after UNC's 20-point loss to Clemson. The score is down there at the bottom. Clemson 85, UNC 65. Somehow to me, it feels like punishment that score is playing over and over again at the bottom of this video, seeing that score. So I'm probably going to take the score down at some point very shortly here. This was not a game that UNC fans are going to be happy about. This was a very tough loss for the Tar Heels on the road. Just to put this in context a little bit, there was an extremely tough loss to Duke. They had that week off. They come back, get the win over the weekend. You can kind of see the team coalescing around this mission of survive and advance, win every single game, win out, get to the NCAA tournament. This game tonight was a big part of that. They needed this win for the NCAA tournament resume. They needed this win really to keep the season and the hopes alive. And North Carolina not only did not get this win, they suffered a very, very tough loss to Clemson. Justin, what goes through your head as you're watching this game? What are some of your first takeaways from this loss?
Well, I think you can just look at the box score and it can kind of tell you at least a glimpse of why North Carolina struggled tonight at Clemson. With a team like this North Carolina team, your margin of error is so much smaller than it would be if it was a team like I was blessed to be on, right? Like we just had a lot of talent. We had guys that competed at all times, and we had guys that were interchangeable at all times. This team doesn't necessarily have that luxury, right? So you can't go into a place like Little John against a team who's coming off beating I guess now they're the number 3 team in Duke, and shoot 4 for 19 from 3, right? Like you can't do that. And you also can't, which 20-point blowout, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's that big of a deal, but you also can't shoot 5 for 11 from the free throw line, right? And so I think the shooting aspect, I think the droughts of scoring, I looked at it, I think that at the end of the first half, the last 8.5 minutes, I think they were outscored 22-9. And that's coming from a portion of the game where it was a close game. I think it was 25-27, I think. They had just cut it to 2, and then by the end of the first half, they were down 16. So I think offensively is what I look at that really killed this team tonight. I think rebounding, which once again, we can talk on it as, until our face turns blue. This team, the limitations when it comes to the size of this team was always going to be an issue. And you go into a game like this where I think Shefflin's leading the ACC in rebounding. And then you had big fella, Victor, he was having an unreal game in the first half. There was a possession in there. I think it felt like they had like 4 offensive rebounds just in one possession in the first half. So, I mean, some of that, yes, you got to box out your matchup, but some of that is just the limitations, and some of it's just, there's really not much you can do with that. But when it comes to going into the second half, you're down 16. This is basically your season on the line, right? Like, it feels like we've been saying it for the past couple weeks. Like, this is the most important game, but your tournament lives are basically on the line with this. And to see at times in spurts that it didn't look like the fight that was needed was being played out there. Now, I will take a step back and I will give RJ Davis and I will give Seth Trimble all of the credit to continue to fight even through the end of the game. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't obviously the end results that we wanted, but to see them continue to fight, to see Seth still play defensively the way that he did, to see RJ still trying to make something happen, I got to give them their credit in that. So we'll take that moral victory and we'll take, any kind of positives. But I think offensively, it was a tough day and it was a tough night. which led into the defense. And then at times it looked like Clemson was just kind of out there, kind of like it was practice. The big fella would just. It felt like I was talking to somebody, and it was like in practice we would split up the bigs and the guards. So the guards would work on whatever actions it is that they would score off of, and then the bigs they would work on their favorite and their counter moves down on the other end. And at times it felt like Clemson was just doing that. Their bigs were just turning over their left shoulder, just a nice little hook off the glass, um, and things like that. But it's a tough one. Uh, it's a tough one. You can't really. I don't think there's much you can really, talk around other than the fact that that was a tough way to go out.
Yeah, there's things on the box score that stand out in terms of, it being a really tough night. 5 of 11 from the free throw line, 45% from the line. That stands out as being a tough night. 4 of 19 from the three-point line. That's not something you want to see. Elliot Cadeau, 6 assists against 6 turnovers. How about Ian Jackson coming off the bench, only scoring 3 points in this one tonight? And then there's things that don't show up on the box score, but also certainly took place in the game. There was the first half where that ball rolled out of bounds and Ian Jackson didn't go for the ball, basically just watched it trickle out of bounds in front of the UNC bench. Contrast that with Victor Lubkin. He was completely gassed at the end of the first half. He had maybe had that half of his life, and there's a ball going out of bounds, and he hustles and he makes the play and he saves the ball for Clemson. And one point I want to make as well, there's been a lot of talk about roster and UNC's construction and things like that. 247 Sports rates every single transfer at the end of each season that goes into the portal. Victor was ranked 179th in that transfer portal ranking. Van Allen Lubin was ranked 112th. Cade Tyson was ranked 34th. And UNC had the 8th ranked transfer portal class. Clemson had the 14th ranked transfer portal class. So that shows you, from a talent evaluation perspective, something happened there. And you saw it on the court tonight. There's a couple of different places we could go from here. Justin, I think one thing that people have been talking about is Ian Jackson. Certainly, he had that really hot streak early on in ACC play. He was putting the ball in the basket really consistently. Why hasn't Ian been able to score the basketball as effectively recently?
This goes back to exactly what I was talking about, even during kind of that hot streak that Ian had. As a freshman in college basketball, especially even with the ACC being weaker, especially in the ACC, going against teams that have scouted you, a good amount. If you really look back on that streak that Ian had, more than likely he was not near the top of the scouting report because of how his minutes were so up and down up until that point. You didn't really know if he was starting, if he was coming off the bench, things like that. Right. So teams start to make adjustments. Right. So, okay, North Carolina's having some sort of success when Ian Jackson scores 20 plus points. So what are we going to do? We're going to make it harder, and we're going to guard him differently than he already was being guarded. Now, as a freshman in college, you've seen very little adjustments from the college standpoint. And so now all of a sudden you're coming off ball screens and you're coming off dribble handoffs, and they're basically doubling you, right? You're coming off some sort of action and the whole entire defense is focused on you, as opposed to you kind of being they lose you every once in a while. You get an open look, right? He started to get the same exact treatment that RJ's had all year long. And so going back to what I had said before, if North Carolina expects and is relying on a freshman who, once again, is uber talented. Ian is one of the best scorers that I've seen with the ball in his hands in a long time, especially as a freshman. But if you expect and you think that reality is that he'll be able to score 20 points a night, and carry this offense at times, it's just not realistic, right? And so I think that's kind of what you've seen. It's not, I wouldn't say it's that Ian has checked out. I wouldn't say that, it's anything other than he's being guarded differently. He's being guarded way more with way more attention than he had. Um, and so it was made harder. And so as a freshman, it's hard to adjust to that. Um, and so I think that kind of goes, and I think that's to one of the things that I think with Ian is when you look at um, what he does on the floor, right? He scores, if he scores 25, he's an unbelievable player, right? And I think one thing for him to work on, whether it's him going to the league, I hope he goes to the league first round and, does amazing, or he comes back to school, is affecting the game in other ways than just scoring, right? Like tonight, he was what was his
Ian Jackson was 0 of 8 from the field, 0 for 3 from the 3-point line, and 3 of 4 from the foul line.
right? So, and I think those 3 free throws, I think they came like towards the end. It was like the last 5 minutes of the game or 10 minutes of the game. And so there for a second, you kind of forget that Ian's on the floor, right? And I've been through, I mean, a ton of basketball players have been through this, but it's how can you affect the game when you're not scoring, right? Or if you are a passer like Elliott, how are you affecting the game if you're not able to get 10, 12 assists, right? And I think for Ian, that's something that I would love to see him, expand as as the season finishes and then as whatever his future looks like, just so that there's never a time. I once had somebody tell me when I was younger, but when I was playing, they said, Justin, you can't ever allow people to forget that you're on the floor, right? So if you're not scoring, there's got to be other ways to, whether that's defensively, whether that's getting to the glass, whether that's making plays for others. There should never be a time when you're like, oh, Ian's still on the floor. You know what I mean? Um, so I think that's, to I use a lot of words there, but I think that for me is kind of what you saw. And it's, I expected teams to play him differently. Did I expect him to necessarily go 0 for 8 and, you know, play only 16 minutes and be taken out of the starting lineup? No. Those are decisions that obviously the staff decide to make on the playing time and stuff like that. But at the same time, if he's not necessarily producing, then you got to figure out something else. So to your question, I think he's just seen a totally different side of defense that he hasn't seen in high school and even in college up to this point. And it's a learning experience. You got to learn. Okay, I've seen the defenses play this way. This is what works against that. Or I've seen them. They try to get physical in this type of situation. Let's go and let's hit him with a back door, or whatever it is. Like it's just a matter of experience. And he's a freshman. He hasn't necessarily seen it. So I think that's kind of what we've seen from Ian.
Yeah, he's facing some double teams as well a little bit on Saturday. He had the 3 assists against Pittsburgh, so, trying to do some creation things, but he's really used to having the ball in his hands and scoring the basketball, beating other players with his athleticism and his shooting. And tonight there were some things that he had to do outside of that skill set, like he was coming into the lane on a cut and couldn't quite gather the ball. And you alluded to his 3 points there. A lot of those points came in garbage time, essentially, which is a basketball concept that I know you're familiar with, Justin. Essentially, when the game is out of reach. And there's a lot of jokes and, memes and things like that about at the professional level, certain players get their points and their shots up in garbage time. Tonight, it felt a little bit like the entire second half was garbage time for UNC at points. I mean, there was a point in which UNC was down 44-67 against Clemson in the second half, 81-60 at other points, closing, of course, with a 20-point loss. I mean, I think we have to mention the fact that, Clemson put their walk-ons in at the end of the game.
Mhm.
I'm like 27 years old, I think, around that age. I cannot remember that happening very often for the North Carolina Tar Heels. I can remember UNC putting in their walk-ons against a lot of teams, and sometimes it would happen even in ACC play. But to see that happen to UNC was something that was really striking to me. We're going to take a few questions here. If you are watching us live on YouTube, throw a question in the chat for Justin. There's a lot of tough questions tonight, so we're going to do our best here to answer some of them as we go throughout the show. I'll bring up this question from WH1315. Justin, does it look to you like the coaches have lost this team? The team, often look like they are disinterested on both ends of the floor. I think for me, one thing that stands out is in the second half, UNC scoring or Clemson taking the ball out under the basket. Hubert Davis calling for a press, kind of motioning his guys forward, and basically all five guys were already back on the other end of the court. I know that's a really big question. Justin, does it look like the coaches have lost this team? You've played a lot of basketball. What does that look like for basketball teams, when the coaches lose the roster a little bit? And then what are some of your thoughts about this year's UNC team on that specifically?
I think that I've seen a locker room be lost from a coach before, obviously not in college. And I would not go to the point to say that that's what this is. I think that this team, the reality of this team is they were less talented than this Clemson team. Right now, that doesn't mean that we don't have talent on our team. Um, but this team, this North Carolina team, is not as good of a team as Clemson is, right? Like I was watching that second half, and there was a possession where Clemson they ended up missing the shot, but I think it was 5 passes within the offense, and there was probably 3 of the passes that were like what you would consider like a good to great type shot. Um, which is basically for those who have never heard that, it's basically somebody who could shoot it. They have a pretty good shot, but they pass it to somebody that might be even more open to get a great shot, right? And so when I see that, that's a team that's together, right? That's a team that knows where their players are, knows, hey, maybe this next guy that I kick it to is a better shooter than I am, or hey, this is just the right play to make, right? You look at the UNC team, and there's so many times where now, whether it's play calling at times, whether it's the defense that's being played against them, there's so many times that the offense just kind of looks like the first play doesn't work, first option doesn't work. Now it's just kind of discombobulated type freelance offense where it's okay. I'm gonna try to jab and drive. Okay, they cut me off. I'm gonna kick it to the next guy, jab, drive, right? Like there's just no like continuity when it comes to their offense. And so I think when I look at that question, um, I think I wouldn't necessarily say it's the coaches. I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a matter of the players themselves, you know, knowing where the guys like to get the ball. Um, but I also think it's a matter of, maybe it's the coaches putting guys in the right places, whether it's having the right personnel out there or having guys in certain spots that they can use their strengths to. I look back to a lot of the plays, for instance, like a guy like Drake, and I love Drake Powell. I love his game. I love how hard he plays and all the things he can do. But there's a lot of times like Drake Powell ends up being the corner guy, which is where is the help side defender is usually coming from, right? Well, when you drive and you kick it to Drake, would you rather have it be an RJ or an Ian maybe in that corner as opposed to Drake, who can be a slasher, a cutter, somebody that can hit the offensive glass at times? It's just little things like that. So I would not go as far to say that they've lost the locker room. Now, losing a game like this, it's very, very difficult, right? So it is, you know, the magnitude of it all, as far as, without basically winning the ACC tournament, your tournament hopes, NCAA tournament hopes being kind of smashed, yeah, that's going to be very difficult to stay together at times, but it's not impossible. So, like I said, it's a difficult one, and there's not really much that you can't really, dress this one up and try to be overly positive about it. It's very tough, but I think once again, like I've hit on before, the accountability has to be across the board, right? The players are on the floor making the decisions, the split decisions at times. The coaches are, calling things out of timeouts and preparing the guys, before the games. So whatever accountability needs to be held, I think it has to be kind of across the board.
We appreciate everyone watching tonight. This is the post-game / the Shooting It Straight podcast after UNC's loss to Clemson 85-65 on the road. We are really in uncharted waters tonight with UNC. Justin, I read this stat to you earlier. I think it's worth repeating. You played at UNC for 3 seasons. Your biggest ACC losses, your freshman year, 13 points against Pitt. Your sophomore year, 5 points against UVA. And then your junior year, a 15-point loss to Miami. You never lost to an ACC team by a 20-point margin. This is something that we've never dealt with. I'm not used to seeing this as someone who's followed Carolina basketball for a long time. Take us through what this would be like from a player perspective. The final horn sounds, you run into the locker room. I assume there's some sort of or a speech by a coach or a player. You have to speak to the media. You hop on the bus and start to head back to Chapel Hill or hop on the plane. Take us through what that's like as a player after a really, really tough loss.
I'll go back to my freshman year when we lost in the Sweet 16, I think, to Wisconsin. It's devastating, right? Like you work, and this is obviously way earlier than the Sweet 16, but it's basically the same. Like you work all season long, your end goal, every team's end goal is a national championship. That's just how it is, right? Whether it's realistic or not, that's what you go through preseason conditioning, that's what you go through, preseason practices, all those 7 a.m. lifts, like all of that stuff. It's the end goal being making it to a national championship and winning it. And so when you don't make that goal, right, and you come up short, and there's things that you can think about, like, man, if only we would have hit 5 more of those threes, right? If only we would have made 5 more free throws. You start to, in your head, you start to just go through all of those, right? Like, man, if we would have done this, we could have done that, we could have done this, could have done that. And so for me, whenever I went through that my freshman year, weirdly, thankfully, the season was over. So you can kind of regroup, figure out what you got to do better, what you got to get better at as a team. What are the things that you weren't very good at to work on, things like that. For this team, going through that kind of experience tonight, possibly, and having to still play another, month of basketball and make a last push through the ACC tournament, um, I'm sure that's extremely difficult, right? Like to be able to rally the guys when it hasn't really seemed like there's been much rallying even up until this point when there was still a good chance to win it and and make a run. So it's going to be difficult. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat anything. I'm not going to say, "Oh, they can do it." It's going to be difficult, but like I said before, it's not impossible, right? Like once again, it's you got to move on to the next game, right? And you got to finish out. At this point, it's all about pride and competing. You know what I mean? Finishing out this conference play as best as you possibly can, and then hopefully trying to make a run in the ACC tournament. And if you finish it out and it doesn't work out, then so be it. We'll be talking about what does next year's team look like? How do you build a good team? What is this? What is that? But for this particular team in this time, I think it's a matter of kind of looking. It's going to sound cliche, but it's looking inside themselves and saying, okay, like, how do I want to finish this season out? Do I just want to lay down and just say, you know what, screw it, let's just lose all the games and we go out really bad like that? Or am I going to have some pride, compete, and try to make every single one of these games going forward mean something like to us as a team, even if it doesn't necessarily mean something to, the tournament committee or whoever's making those decisions. So hopefully that's kind of the mindset they take. Because if not, it's going to be a rough last month of basketball for them and for everybody else to watch. So hopefully that's kind of what they decide to do.
Yes, next up for the Tar Heels on Saturday on the road against Syracuse. So a little bit of time over the next few days to reset. I'm going to bring up this question from, it's not even really a question, it's more of a comment from David Hunt. I think it captures what a lot of people are feeling. Us Carolina fans are frustrated because this is not the Carolina basketball we know. And I think that definitely speaks to a lot of the feelings tonight. I mean, like you said, maybe we're never going to, never say never, but this is a huge hit to North Carolina's NCAA tournament resume.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a really unfamiliar spot for UNC to be in because North Carolina basketball does not miss the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things. The field expanded to 64 teams in 1985. It's a very small list of years that UNC did not make the NCAA tournament. It's 2002, 2003, 2010, 2020, 2023, and then potentially we'll see what happens, but this year might be added to that list. That's not a lot of years. Again, like I said, we're about the same age. There's basically 3 times on that list that we remember from the history of UNC basketball, and all those times really since we've been alive. So this is a uncharted territory for UNC basketball in terms of what this means for their postseason hopes and really what it means for the program as well. Um, I'm going to take a quick second. I'll do a very quick ad read for Congruity. Shout out to Congruity for sponsoring this show and all of Inside Carolina's podcasts, as well as Johnny T-shirt. You're listening to the Inside Carolina postgame show after UNC's tough loss to Clemson on Monday night. We appreciate everyone watching this here on the show, commenting here in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from here tonight. I know there's a lot of comments, a lot of great comments. So let us know where you're watching from, in addition to some of your thoughts about the Tar Heels. Justin, when you look at this team, let's say you're a member of this team or something like that, what were some of the things that you would do in the next few days? How do you start to pick up the pieces from a loss like this? And what do the next few days look like in preparation for the next game against Syracuse? Kind of how would you turn the page if you were a player on this team?
That's a difficult question, man. The positive side of me wants to say, you know what? We wake up tomorrow, it's another day. The sun comes up. Let's try to get better today, right? That's the positive side of me. The side of understanding how these players could be feeling right now and how, disappointment can really hit hard. Um, it's going to be difficult. Um, it's going to be difficult for these guys to continue each and every day to go to practice, compete in practice, try to get better. Now, I will say, and I think through the NIL and the transfer portal, stuff that's going on in college basketball right now, we kind of lose sight of the end goal, right? All the money that goes around and everything like that, and the opportunities and the connections that you can make through basketball, it doesn't stop at just North Carolina, right? So for these guys, for individuals, what is it that you truly want to do, right? Is it that you want to play at North Carolina for 4 or 5 years and make some money while you're playing basketball in college and then be done? Or do you want to continue to play on? Does RJ want to continue to play on professionally? Does Ian and Drake want to try to go first round? Does Jay Wash, Seth, all of these guys, do they want to continue to play after college? Because if that's the case, then the mentality that they have to have is, okay, you know what? Yeah, this is tough, but there's a bigger goal that we have, right? Just as individuals. So that means getting up and still going and getting shots up before and after practice, getting shots up outside of practice, um, doing extra treatment to keep their bodies right, whatever that might look like. And that's what they have to do. As a team, this comes down to leadership. And it comes down to, it comes down to the coaches, but it comes down to the players as well that are on the floor, right? Guys have to rally around each other and say, hey, fellas, like, we can't go out like this, right? Like, we just can't. We've got to put out everything we possibly can. And even though there's a 0.5% that we have the chance to make it to the tournament, we've got to show fight, right? And we've got to come to practice. We've got to compete against each other, make each other better, and that kind of mindset. So, not saying it's easy, not saying it's going to be easy, but that's the mindset that the players individually have to take, and as a team they have to take to try to move past kind of this tough reality that they kind of were hit with tonight at Clemson.
Yeah, you brought up a point in there that I think I want to hit on briefly. This concept of NIL, and we're moving towards a model of professional basketball really at the college level. The players are getting paid to come to UNC and perform. They're hoping to move on to the NBA and also play professionally as well. But they're playing professional basketball at the college level in many ways too. And when you look at the professional level of basketball, there are some hard conversations and, things happen if you do not perform. That's just the reality of it. The example I'll give, I'm a Philadelphia 76ers fan, and this has not been a good year for the Philadelphia 76ers. At the trade deadline, they tried to get younger. They traded some of their older players, and they are looking towards the future because professional basketball is a business, and the 76ers are looking ahead, understanding that this season has not gone the way that the fans were hoping or that the front office was hoping. So there's going to be, I think, an element of reality that will start to set in with this roster because, again, these are professionals and things might need to happen in terms of roster reconstruction. The challenge is during the NCAA season, there's no mid-season trade deadline. You can't trade players mid-season. So the same problems we've been talking about all year in terms of the roster construction, we saw them again tonight. Justin, we're going to close it out here soon. Appreciate everyone watching, everyone commenting. Lots of really great comments in the chat here, lots of passion. So we appreciate that. We appreciate everyone watching. Justin, your final thoughts, final takeaways from a game like this. A very tough loss for the Tar Heels, 85-65 to Clemson. RJ Davis led the Tar Heels in scoring with 18 points. Seth off the bench, in the starting lineup with 12 points. You can kind of take it if you want to spin some positives or any just final thoughts from tonight's game.
I think the game itself, it kind of spoke for itself, I would say. I think with this team, I will continue to say, if we're going to sit here and we're going to say that a bad year here, kills the North Carolina legacy, then we're just in a world of not reality, right? UNC, University of North Carolina basketball in Chapel Hill still means a lot to a lot of people, right? Yes, it's a bad year, right? Bad year. And Kyle, I see you say 3 bad years. Last year they made it to the Sweet 16, so that's not a bad year. But when it says, when you go into, let's lay out, because I'm seeing a bunch of people say 1 bad year, question mark, right? Let's lay this out a little bit. His first year, they make it to the national championship. I'll lay it out once again. They make it to the national championship. Now, for all the fans, right, I don't think you understand how hard it truly is um, to make it to a national championship. Whether you get hot or not, it is extremely difficult. Next year, they missed the tournament. Bad year. Once again, bad year. If I'm not mistaken, Coach Williams, who in my opinion is the GOAT of coaching, I think one of his teams went to the NIT, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mm.
Okay. So the next year, you go, which was last year, you go to the Sweet 16. You lose to a team that made it to the Final Four and lost to the national champions, right? Now you go into this year and uh bad year, right? Bad year. Let's also change up kind of what we're looking at as well. You're taking over for Coach Williams, who, like I said, is the GOAT of college basketball coaching, right? You're completely changing the landscape of college basketball, whether it's the conferences, the NIL, the transfer portals, all of that. You are giving Coach Davis the keys, who he's never been a head coach, right? He was an assistant for us for a few years, and Coach Williams wanted him to be the head coach. So any good man, if Coach Williams said, "Hey, I want you to be the next head coach," would say, "I got you," right? So now he's trying to figure it out as he goes, while also having some success along the way. Okay. So to sit here and say that, you know, that the UNC legacy is UNC basketball having a very down year this year? 100%. I'm never going to sit here and say, oh man, like North Carolina is still great. No, they had a rough year, a bad year. I know we're not used to that, right? I know we're not used to that. But to sit here and say that UNC on the front of a jersey has taken a hit, the legacy, I need everybody that goes to those games to walk into that Dean Dome and look up into those rafters and see all of those banners that are up there, right? That never changes, and that will never be taken away. So to sit here and act like North Carolina is now just some subpar program, that's ignorant. That's just, and for all the fans that are saying that and thinking that, then y'all just aren't really true fans. So for me, going forward, right, I will always, truth is truth, right? Truth is always going to be truth. This team was not very good this year. They had limitations, whether that was from being built in the portal or just guys coming back and not playing great. But they weren't very good this year. But I think even those guys that are on the floor understand that, right? Um, and I think that going forward, I am personally going to take a stance of, hey, this is a rough one, but UNC will be back. Okay. Because if we sit here and we just talk about all the bads, how UNC is gone and Coach Davis has ruined it, and, this and that, this and that, I can't. I can't sit here and do that. I love this university way too much. I've put in way too much time, way too much sweat, accomplished way too much um, to just sit here and say that North Carolina is done. So moving forward to the game on Saturday, I hope these guys come out and they find some sort of fight. They come together and they figure out how to get a win, get the morale back up, get guys just feeling better to, make, the rest of this season an enjoyable season. So to all the fans out there, man, we obviously love you. And we 100% appreciate your backing and your support when it comes to playing for the University of North Carolina. But UNC will be back. I promise you, UNC will be back. And so, I guess we'll see it. I hope everybody has an unbelievable and a beautiful rest of the week and enjoys family and friends and tell somebody they love them, and hopefully don't allow this very minuscule game of basketball affect the rest of your lives. So I hope everybody has a great week.